You are listening to Verba Manent, where words do remain. She is a notable and widely audible voice of African contemporary literature. Her debut novel, Nervous Conditions, was named as one of the top 100 books that have shaped the world by the BBC in 2018. This 1988 publication was also the first to be published in English by a black woman from Zimbabwe. She was arrested on the 31st of July 2020 in Harare, Zimbabwe, due to anti-corruption protests. It was also the year she appeared on the BBC's 100 Women list. She has now gone on to win the 2021 Pen Pinter Prize. She is Tsitsi Dangarembga. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the podcast series Right the Wrongs. Every Wednesday and Friday, Right the Wrongs raises public awareness on pressing human rights issues and creates an incubator of activism. In this episode, we will be talking about Tsitsi Dangarembga. This year she was given by Omar Obama the Peace Prize of the German book trade. Since 1950, the Foundation Board of the Peace Prize has awarded this prize to an important personality who has made a significant contribution to peace, humanity, and understanding between people. They have chosen Tsitsi Dangarembga from Zimbabwe as this year's winner for her work as a writer and filmmaker. She was born on February the 14th, 1959, on present-day North Zimbabwe. She lived in England when she was 2 until she was 6. She went to high school in an elite, predominantly white girls' school in the capital. Then in 1977, Dangarembga studied medicine at the University of Cambridge, where she experienced racism and isolation before returning home 3 years later. She worked briefly as a teacher and a copywriter at a marketing agency. Dangarembga also started writing plays at the drama club of the University of Zimbabwe, where she studied psychology. She has written an internationally successful trilogy of novels telling the story of a young woman striving for self-determination in post-colonial Zimbabwe. In this work, Dangarembga illustrates the mechanism of oppression linked with gender, colonialism, and racism. The 1993 movie Neria, which is based on one of her stories, became one of the most popular films in her country. Her latest novel, The Mournable Body, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2020. Dangarembga is also an activist who promotes freedom, women's rights, and political change in her country. For her work, she received in 2021 the Pen Pinter Prize as well as the Pen International Award for Freedom of Expression, which honours authors who continue their writing despite persecution. Indeed, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, popularly known as the ZANU-PF, has been in power in Zimbabwe since its independence in 1980. It led the country's struggle for freedom. Sadly, as it turned out for Zimbabwe, however, the ZANU-PF has not kept a structure as democratic as it had promised. According to human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, the government of Zimbabwe violates the rights to shelter, food, freedom of movement and residence, as well as freedom of assembly and protection of the law. There are assaults on the media, the political opposition, civil society activists, and human rights defenders. Opposition gatherings are frequently the subject of brutal attacks by the police force, such as the crackdown on the 11th of March 2007. Indeed, during the Movement for Democratic Change rally, party leader Morgan Tsvangirai and 49 other opposition activists were arrested and severely beaten by the police. Edward Chikombo, a journalist who sent images of the beatings to foreign media, was abducted and murdered a few days later. The government controls the Herald, a newspaper which is the driving force of the narrative they create around the human rights violations. Women are disadvantaged in Zimbabwe due to economic dependency and social norms which prevents them fighting sex discrimination. Despite legal prohibitions, customs such as forced marriage are still in place. Homosexuality is criminalized and criticized by the highest officials, such as former President Robert Mugabe. It was also alleged that Zimbabwe security forces had the torture camp in the Marangi diamond fields, with allegations of torture being as recent as 2020. There have been widespread reports of crimes against humanity by the Mugabe government between 1980 and 2017. Reports have only gotten worse and more concerning during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tsitsi Dangarembga has been awarded the Peace Prize of the German book trade for multiple reasons. Through her unique storytelling and her particular perspective, she has put forward, in her acclaimed trilogy of novels, the story of a young woman's struggle for the right to live in dignity and the fight for female self-determination in Zimbabwe. Therefore, she reveals the social and moral conflicts that go beyond the regional scope, creating an international discussion of relevant questions of justice. In her movies, she exposes issues emerging from the clash of tradition and modernity. The messages stemming from her work have reached audiences in Zimbabwe and the rest of the world. In addition to her artistic work, Dangarembga has dedicated herself to the fostering of several creative industries in Zimbabwe, especially by opening up culture to female creators. She has also fought tirelessly for civil liberties and political change in Zimbabwe. In her most recent peaceful protest, Dangarembga fought against corruption, even if she has faced prosecution by the government for her efforts. As she states herself, "If you want your suffering to end, you have to act. Action comes from hope. This is the principle of faith and action." It is for these reasons that the Foundation Board of the Peace Prize has decided to award her with the Peace Prize of the German book trade. The COVID-19 pandemic has been harsh on both the rights and well-being of the Zimbabwean people. This is shown in Amnesty International's findings in Zimbabwe for the year 2020. Indeed, in January, a constitutional amendment gave the president powers to handpick judges to higher courts. At the end of March, the government imposed punitive restrictions on movement as part of the measures to tackle the pandemic. All year round, information about lockdown rules were unclear, and their implementation appeared to be arbitrary. Due to the economic effects of the pandemic, the government has been unable to provide social security to vulnerable citizens. As a result, according to a UN report, 7 million people were in need of humanitarian assistance and 4.3 million people were in severe food insecurity. This resulted in mass protests against corruption and the handling of the pandemic by the government. Security forces used excessive force to crack down on these peaceful protests and to impose lockdown restrictions, killing at least 10 people, whose deaths were never investigated properly. They also arbitrarily arrested and detained protesters and others in the name of violating COVID-19 measures. In the first 4 months of lockdown, 116,000 people were arrested for violating COVID-19 measures. Many were subjected to violence, including a significant number of women. The government used these restrictions as an excuse to limit civic space and restrict human rights. Section 14 of Statutory Instrument 83 of 2020 on public health regulations criminalized the spread of false news about COVID-19 and imposed a 20-year prison sentence and/or a hefty fine. The commander of the Zimbabwe National Army said that the social media were proving to be a threat to national security, and the military would put private electronic communications under surveillance to guard against subversion. Within the first 11 days of lockdown, 764 cases of violence against women and girls were recorded, rising to 2,768 by mid-June. The authorities failed to prioritize services to protect women from such attacks. Meanwhile, victims were denied prompt access to justice. Police and military officers used the COVID-19 restrictions as a way to justify the harassment and intimidation of journalists and other media workers, at least 25 of whom were assaulted and arbitrarily arrested and detained while working or on their way to and from work. The government of Zimbabwe has generally responded to accusations of human rights violations from Western countries by counter-accusations of colonial attitudes and hypocrisy, claiming that countries such as the United Kingdom and the United States are guilty of similar or worse transgressions, for example in the Iraq War. It is the work of activists, writers, and movie makers such as Tsitsi Dangarembga that allows us to raise awareness on the human rights violations in Zimbabwe. That's the end of today's episode on Tsitsi Dangarembga. Feel free to engage with us on Facebook and Instagram, and join us for further discussions on a Telegram group, or leave us a comment at theverbamanetpodcast@gmail.com. This episode was written by Zainab and Sanchit, recorded by Mason, produced by Ines, and brought to you by Right the Wrongs under Verbamanent. The next episode of Right the Wrongs will air on Wednesday. You can find the program wherever you find your podcasts, bringing you detailed updates on pressing human rights issues. Till next time, take care.